Hi everybody, welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel, The Small Art Society. My name is Susie. The cat on the screen is my cat Phoebe. She makes an appearance here and there on my channel. Today I'm going to be talking you guys through a tiny painting. This is what my setup usually looks like. I always have a water bottle with me, I always have my iPad so I can watch something while I paint, and a Pinterest reference photo up. And these are the core materials that I'm going to be using today. I'm setting aside my Daniel Smith watercolor paints. I thought I was going to use them today, but in the end I didn't use them, and you'll see what I used instead. This is my kind of daily art kit. It's what I use the most and where I keep all my daily supplies. I'm setting aside a fine liner, a graphite watercolor pencil that I'm going to be using, a little misting bottle, and my things on the back of my pouch. So even though I'm working from home, I still really like to use my watercolor travel brushes. They are really great. I have a size 4 and a size 1, and these are excellent for a tiny painting. So those are definitely coming out for this painting today. I'm going to pull out my kneaded eraser, my little clip, my tiny palette, which has 8 kind of primary, is almost like not a full split palette, but it just has some basic colors in there, and my tiny sketchbook, of course. My tiny sketchbook is nearly full. Today I'm painting on the very last page, but I still have a couple of blank pages that I'm going to be filling in over the coming week. And stay tuned next week. I'm going to be posting a tiny sketchbook tour where I'll show you all of my tiny paintings to date in that sketchbook. And those are really my core materials for today. So without wasting too much time, I'm jumping straight in with my watercolor pencil outline. This is a step that sometimes I skip and sometimes I don't skip, depending on where I am, how many materials I have, and what I'm doing. What I found is that I don't put down a pencil sketch with too much detail. Really, I like to just get down the basic shapes of what I'm going to be drawing, and I do this when I'm painting from a reference photo and also when I'm painting from life. So when I am maybe doing a still life, or when I'm out urban sketching somewhere and drawing on location, I still really appreciate the use of a pencil just to get those kind of solid figures in, and so that I know that my composition is okay and that I'm happy with the direction that I'm going to be taking the painting in. But there have been plenty of occasions where I've decided to not bring along my watercolor pencil or just a regular pencil and a kneaded eraser, and to only bring a fine liner with me and just get started drawing on a fine liner without having a pencil base. And sometimes that can be a little bit scary, because having that pencil base gives me a little bit more security that what I'm drawing is going to be okay, that it's going to come out how I want it to come out. But it's been a really nice process to let go of that sometimes, and to just trust my instincts and just go in with a pen, with a fine liner, and not worry too much about whether it does or doesn't come out exactly how I like it, and whether my composition is 100% okay. It's just a sketchbook. It's not that serious. So sometimes I like to skip the pencil stage, but for this one I figured I would include it. You might have already picked up that I've sped up the process here. Now, I want to let you guys know exactly how long it took me to complete this tiny painting. So from the very start to the very finish, it took me about 30 minutes to complete this tiny painting. Now, that is a good amount of time. It's probably reflective of how long a tiny painting would usually take me, depending on the level of detail for something that I'm painting. For something like this, 30 minutes is about what I would expect to spend on a painting. I did include some details in this, so you can see that I've tried to kind of make the crust to look like a crust, and I'm adding some of the finer details on the egg, and a little bit later on you're going to see me add a little bit of texture using the fine liner to the bread as well. And that is usually how I would approach my tiny watercolor paintings. So I thought it was helpful to kind of highlight, in total it took me 30 minutes to do this. I have sped up some of this drawing process. So just for the sake of time, really, so that you're not sat here for 30 minutes watching me paint very, very slowly, I thought it might be a little bit helpful to speed this up. But if you would be interested in a much slower process, full process from beginning to end with no speeding up of the content, do let me know, and I'm happy to post that as well someday. That way you can maybe draw along with me, and we can do that for a future video if you're interested. Please drop me a comment and let me know. Otherwise, I will probably continue making videos in this format. So you can see here, I'm putting in some of the details for the bread. One of the things that I've been interested in recently is figuring out how to get my paintings to either seem a little bit more impressionistic or fall a little bit more into the realm of realism. So I posted a poll on my Instagram page recently where I asked people that follow me whether they preferred a painting where there was fine liner used to create some more depth, or whether they preferred a painting where I used more watercolors to kind of get some illusion of depth. And it was really interesting seeing across kind of different platforms the comments that people made. I also posted in an art YouTuber's kind of community page as well to hear people's thoughts, and it was really interesting how people kind of varied in their preferences and maybe what they thought was more effective. Now, I don't really strive for realism in my paintings. I'm really kind of amazed by people that can achieve realism. It's really, really incredible. For me, as I'm pretty happy with anything that I draw, as long as it kind of gives the illusion of what I meant and kind of set out to draw. So for this tiny painting here, you can tell that it's an egg and you can tell that it's on a piece of toast. So for me, I'm very happy with that. I would consider that a successful drawing for myself. And I opted to create a little bit more depth with the fine liners in this one. Now, this is the point where I had to decide whether I was going to go with my tiny palette or with my Daniel Smith. And I decided that the yellow that I had in my tiny palette was going to allow me to get the kind of intensity of the yellow that I needed for the yolk. So I decided to just stick with my tiny palette for this one. The reason that I wasn't sure whether I was going to use my tiny palette or my Daniel Smith paints for this painting was because in my tiny palette, I purchased this and I received this in September of 2024. And when I filled this in, I didn't own any artist grade watercolors. So I filled this in using Cotman watercolors from Winsor & Newton. And those are really good quality. For being student grade paints, they are phenomenal quality. But I have gotten to a point in my art journey where I really prefer the vibrancy and the I guess vibrancy really is the best word for it, of artist grade watercolors. So sometimes, even though I absolutely love my tiny palette and it has changed my art practice in so many ways and made art so much more accessible for me, to the point where I would choose using my tiny palette even if I'm just sat at my desk at home, because I love the ease that it brings me. Even though that's the case, sometimes I still do gravitate towards my Daniel Smith watercolor paints in that kind of big palette, because the colors are much more vibrant, and that's just because all that I had available to me at the time when I filled up my tiny watercolor palette was the student grade watercolors. Now, I am on a mission to at some point purchase probably the Daniel Smith Essentials set and refill my tiny palette with some artist grade watercolors, but I'm not going to do that without first finishing the watercolors that I have in here. So actually, the fact that I really want to fill this palette up with professional watercolors is pushing me to using the paint that I have in here more. So that has been really great, because I'm obviously just trying to, first of all, use it up, but also not being too serious about the paints that I'm using and just, playing along with the materials that I have. And, having said that the Daniel Smith is a lot more vibrant, the artist grade watercolors. I still think that the yolk in this tiny painting was able to achieve a certain level of vibrancy even using the Cotman, so the student grade watercolors. So, all in all, I'm still very happy with, it was mainly the yolk that I was concerned about, right? The rest of the reference picture, the egg whites and the toast, they don't really need that level of vibrancy, but the yolk, I felt I was looking at Hansa Yellow Deep and Hansa Yellow Medium, and I was just imagining how amazing those two colors would come together to make a beautiful, vibrant yolk. But I decided to just stick with I think I used cadmium yellow hue and cadmium red hue from the Cotman Winsor Newton, which I have in this tiny palette, and I'm still happy with it. So, no issues whatsoever with the student grade watercolors from my perspective. I still think that they're very effective. And again, this is just my sketchbook. I'm not making any of these paintings to sell or anything like that. So it's a safe space for me to try things out and to use different colors and things like that. Earlier on in the video, you would have seen that where my tiny palette is attached to right now, I have a tiny painting of a little pig that I made very, very recently. And I used the Cotman watercolors that are in this tiny palette for that painting as well. And again, I was a little bit concerned about getting that pink right, but I was able to achieve those pink tones for that tiny pig painting really well using just the colors that I have in this tiny set right here. So again, really happy with it, and I'm really excited that I'm using these paints up. That's the big goal with all of the art supplies I own, right? Just making sure that I'm using them and that I'm appreciating them and that I'm giving them the space that they deserve to be played around with and to just enjoy using them and not get too hung up on certain art decisions. So overall, I'm happy with what I decided on for this painting. Now, here you can see that I'm kind of going in for the crust. I actually realized that I think I made the color for the crust a little bit too orange at first, so you're gonna see me tone that down a little bit using I think it's raw umber. I might be wrong, I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head what colors I have in this palette, but that kind of brown color is the one that I used to tone it down a little bit because it was just looking a little bit too orange and it wasn't looking quite right. So I think that's the only point in today's tiny painting where I kind of realized, I might have made a slightly incorrect color mixing choice when I put this down, but I was able to rectify it pretty quickly and it wasn't an issue. So I was really proud of having developed the skills to be able to rectify a little issue like that. And in the end, it didn't come out quite as orange as it looked in the beginning, which was good. One of the things that I really liked with this painting was the ability to try to get some of those shadows in the egg white. I was a little bit concerned about being able to mix the correct color for that, but in the end, I think I got the correct shade of gray. It was a really tricky one because I didn't want to obviously go too deep because it's not too deep of a shadow. It just needs to kind of create some dimension in the egg white. But in the end, I think I got there okay. And like I said, even though this video is sped up and you can kind of see things a little bit quicker, that it took only about 30 minutes to complete this from start to finish, really goes to show how much quicker this kind of format of tiny painting can be. When I'm not working on larger things, I really enjoy working on tiny format because it just feels so much more accessible. Like, I could be on a lunch break at work or needing to just take 10 minutes of headspace from something, and I could sit down and even in 10 minutes probably get a tiny painting done. So in the end, this is what my tiny painting looks like. I'm very happy with it. I realized just as I was at this point that I had missed out a really important part of this painting, and that was adding in some tiny little highlights on the egg yolk. So I pulled out my gel pen, my white gel pen, And I just kind of went in and added 2 tiny little marks to give that egg yolk a bit more of a shine. And this was something that was in the reference picture. Now, I could have used masking fluid to preserve the white of the paper, but I don't really care too much about doing that. Sometimes I do use my masking fluid, but sometimes it's just easier to go in with a gel pen afterwards. And the final step in this process is giving my tiny palette a good clean to just make sure that the colors aren't kind of contaminated with other colors from mixing. I love twirling my tiny palette this way. I thought some of you guys might appreciate the kind of novelty of that, so I've left that clip in. And that's my tiny painting for today. I'm really looking forward to sharing my full tiny sketchbook tour with you guys next week. It should be a really interesting video talking you through my tiny painting adventures and how kind of learning to tiny paint has gone for me and what that process has been. It's absolutely changed my life and I've really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to share that with you guys next week. The final thing is I just wanted to have just a little space on screen so that you could see all the materials that I used today. And that's the end of today's video. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you'd like to follow along in my art journey. It also really helps me out if you like this video or leave me a comment. And with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next week.